The Mississippi River has dropped to just 60% of its normal level. More than 18 million people depend on this river for drinking water, shipping, and power. Barges that normally glide through its channel now scrape against exposed sandbars. Every passing week pushes the waterline farther away from docks, pumps, and ports. And the drought that triggered this collapse is still tightening its grip. For generations, the Mississippi River has carried the economic bloodstream of the United States, moving nearly 500 million tons of cargo every year through its 2,300-mile system. Grain, coal, fertilizer, steel, and petroleum all move along this corridor, but the river is shrinking. Water gauges across the central United States show levels falling to depths not recorded in modern monitoring history. Sand islands are appearing where channels once ran deep. Ports from Louisiana to Missouri report severe navigation restrictions, and forecasters warn the basin's rainfall deficit continues to widen. Water levels across the Mississippi River Basin have fallen to critical thresholds. The U.S. Geological Survey reports several monitoring gauges in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas registering depths 6 to 12 feet below seasonal averages. In Memphis, Tennessee, the river recently dropped below -8 feet on the official gauge scale, an indicator of how far conditions have deviated from historical norms. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has deployed dredging crews to clear sediment and reopen critical shipping lanes, removing more than 2.7 million cubic yards of sand and silt in emergency operations along the lower river. Commercial shipping is already slowing. According to the American Waterways Operators Industry Group, barge loads have been cut by nearly 40% to prevent vessels from running aground. Towboats that once pushed 40 barges at a time are now limited to 25 or fewer. Each reduction multiplies transportation costs across the agricultural supply chain. The Department of Agriculture estimates grain shipping delays could cost U.S. exporters more than $20 billion if the drought continues through the fall harvest season. Federal authorities have announced plans to deepen sections of the navigation channel by 2 additional feet, but that project will not begin until next month. By then, several critical river crossings may already be impassable. While headlines blame drought alone, the Mississippi River's crisis has been quietly amplified by decades of engineered control. For years, federal flood control systems have forced the river into a rigid channel designed for navigation and flood prevention, not long-term ecological stability. Levees stretch more than 3,500 miles along the river system, cutting the waterway off from the natural wetlands and floodplains that once absorbed rainfall and slowly released water back into the channel during dry seasons. That buffering system is gone. At the same time, upstream industrial water withdrawals have expanded dramatically. Power plants, chemical facilities, and agricultural irrigation systems collectively extract billions of gallons every day from tributaries feeding the Mississippi Basin. Many of those withdrawals operate under permits that allow usage even during drought emergencies. The result is a river that now behaves less like a resilient ecosystem and more like a managed pipeline. When rainfall collapses, the system has no reserve. Water disappears faster than nature can replace it. The chain begins in 1928, when Congress passed the Flood Control Act after the catastrophic 1927 Mississippi River flood displaced nearly 700,000 people. The law authorized the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to construct an extensive system of levees, spillways, and navigation channels designed to control the river's behavior. The project succeeded at preventing major floods in populated areas, but it also severed the river from millions of acres of natural floodplain wetlands that historically stored excess water. In 1973, another major flood reinforced the same engineering philosophy. Federal authorities doubled down on levee construction rather than restoring wetlands. Navigation channels were dredged deeper and straighter to speed barge traffic. The Mississippi became one of the most controlled river systems on Earth. Then came 1993, when historic flooding again overwhelmed parts of the Midwest. The disaster triggered new infrastructure spending, but almost no structural reconsideration of the river's design. Flood prevention remained the priority. Water retention did not. By 2012, the first modern warning of drought vulnerability emerged. Water levels dropped so sharply that the Corps of Engineers blasted rock formations near Thebes, Illinois, to keep shipping lanes open. Scientists warned that climate volatility could swing the river between catastrophic floods and record droughts. Those warnings intensified after 2018, when record floods forced levee releases across the basin. The river system entered a cycle of extremes, and now the pendulum has swung the other direction. The deeper cause sits beneath the drought itself. The Mississippi River system has lost its natural capacity to regulate water. Dr. James Pinter, a geomorphologist at Southern Illinois University who studies the river's long-term behavior, said this: "The Mississippi today is one of the most engineered rivers on Earth. When you confine a river with levees and prevent it from spreading into its floodplain, you remove the natural storage system that stabilizes water levels. That statement reveals the structural weakness now unfolding. Floodplains once acted like enormous natural reservoirs. During wet seasons, they absorbed excess water. During dry seasons, they slowly released it back into the river channel. But modern levees and channelization projects prevent that exchange. The river can surge violently when storms arrive, then collapse just as quickly when rainfall disappears. The scale of that lost storage is staggering. Scientists estimate that more than 20 million acres of wetlands connected to the Mississippi Basin have vanished since the early 20th century. To visualize that loss, it equals an area roughly the size of South Carolina. Without those wetlands, drought impacts accelerate dramatically. Water drains downstream faster. Sediment accumulates in the channel. Navigation corridors shrink. The system becomes fragile. What appears to be a drought crisis is also the result of a century of engineering decisions. Marcus Delgado stands on the cracked concrete edge of the Greenville Harbor dock, staring down at water that should be several feet higher. He is 46 years old, broad-shouldered, with a faded Mississippi River pilot's cap and sun-creased skin from 20 years navigating cargo barges along this stretch of river. Right now he is not steering anything. His towboat sits tied to the pier behind him because the channel ahead has narrowed to a dangerous corridor of mud and shifting sandbars. Delgado checks his phone for updated river gauges every hour. Each update shows the same pattern: another inch gone. Earlier this morning, he walked nearly 30 yards across exposed riverbed that was underwater just weeks ago. Broken shells crunch under his boots. The air smells like warm silt and diesel fuel. He watches another barge convoy slow to a crawl upstream, tug engines straining. What is happening to Marcos Delgado's river is not just a drought. It is the visible edge of a system running out of margin. The consequences now ripple far beyond the riverbanks. Nearly 60% of U.S. grain exports move through the Mississippi River system. When water levels fall, each barge must carry less cargo to avoid grounding. That means more trips, slower transit, and sharply rising transportation costs. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that barge freight prices along the lower Mississippi have already surged by up to 70% in some shipping corridors. Farmers in Iowa and Illinois are now paying thousands of extra dollars per shipment simply to move corn and soybeans south to export terminals in Louisiana. Energy infrastructure feels the strain as well. Several coal-fired power plants rely on barge deliveries that travel through the shrinking channel. If shipments stall, regional electricity markets tighten. Fertilizer shipments slow. Fuel transport becomes unreliable. The ecological effects expand quietly but rapidly. Fish populations concentrate into smaller pools of water, raising temperatures and lowering oxygen levels. Migratory birds that rely on wetlands along the river corridor find drying habitat. Sediment exposed by falling water erodes into dust storms during windy conditions across parts of Arkansas and Mississippi. The economic shock spreads outward like a widening fracture. Insurance markets adjust. Commodity futures spike. Port operators report delays stretching days longer than normal. The last time river commerce slowed this dramatically was during the 1988 Midwest drought, which caused billions in agricultural losses. But today's shipping volume is far larger. Alarm inside the scientific community is escalating. Dr. Richard Spinrad, administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, warned during a recent briefing that prolonged drought across the Mississippi Basin could redefine the operational limits of the river itself. He said this: "If precipitation patterns do not recover soon, navigation disruptions could become the new normal rather than a temporary event." Hydrologist Dr. Catherine Clark of the U.S. Geological Survey has issued an even sharper warning. She said this: "Official messaging still frames this as a temporary drought. The data suggests something more structural is unfolding. Their warnings directly challenge the calmer tone used by federal agencies managing river traffic, because what is unfolding along the Mississippi River is not simply a dry season. It is a systemic failure building across an entire watershed." Evening settles over the Mississippi River near Vicksburg. The channel looks unfamiliar. Dark sandbars rise like islands where currents once ran deep. Mud cracks in long, jagged lines along the shoreline. Barges creep through the narrowed corridor, engines rumbling low as pilots search for safe depth. Egrets stand in shallow pools where water once covered the riverbank. The air smells of warm silt and diesel drifting across exposed riverbed. A freight convoy inches forward, its wake barely rippling the thin water surface. How long before these shipping lanes close completely? What happens when the river that feeds half a continent can no longer carry its cargo? And if the Mississippi continues shrinking, what else in this system collapses next? The Mississippi River is not simply experiencing a drought. It is revealing the limits of a system engineered beyond its natural balance. If conditions persist, the river that built a nation's commerce will continue shrinking until the system fails.